All right, let's bring in Professor Alexey Muraviev, an associate professor of national security and strategic studies at Curtin University, Perth, Western Australia. He joins us live via Zoom. Welcome to the program, Professor. Thank you for joining us here on The World Today. Why is this situation or this turn of events between the Wagner Group and the Russian military so important given the Russian government structure? What would you say the Wagner chief is trying to come up with? What is their strategy and what do you see happening?
Look, Richard, this remains a mystery to many, including myself. It's something that some predicted. It's something that no one in Russia probably wanted to believe it could happen. I mean, there are several scenarios that perhaps can be entertained here. One is that the founder of the group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is trying to negotiate special conditions for himself and his personnel against the backdrop of the current institutionalization issued by Russia's Ministry of Defense, that all volunteer units, all private units fighting alongside the Russian military have to sign formal contracts with Russia's Ministry of Defense, and by that become formally subordinated to Russia's general staff. What it means is a loss of autonomy for Prigozhin, a loss of influence for Prigozhin. He would just become an element of Russia's military machine, whilst before he was fighting alongside the Russians against the Ukrainians, whilst retaining a degree of autonomy and obviously freedom of action with regards to other business his organization was doing outside of Russia, including in Africa. So perhaps it's a very kind of blatant and brutal way for him to effectively blackmail the Kremlin into some sort of negotiations with him. The other possibility is actually an attempt to stage a military coup, and Prigozhin was positioning himself as one of Russia's leading and most outspoken hardliners, and obviously he spoke a lot about the corruption, about the apparent incompetence that exists in Russia's power structures, but also in Moscow. So perhaps it is an attempt to stage a military coup, but the timing, if that's the case, is really critical for the Russians, because they're in the middle of countering Ukraine's counteroffensive or an offensive. So all eyes are on the front line, where the Russians seem to be doing reasonably well, but if the Wagner Group will open up hostilities against Russian forces inside Russia and try to take the fight all the way to Moscow, that may change battlefield situation for the Russians dramatically, and would actually be the most serious test to Putin's personal power grip that he ever faced in years, because Russia doesn't have a history of military coups or attempted armed mutinies orchestrated by any affiliates of Russia's power structures. And for a long time, the Wagner Group was certainly being viewed as one of the shock elements of Russia's military machine and Russia's security apparatus.
Finally, before we let you go, I guess the question that needs to be asked is, does the Wagner Group have what it takes to actually take on the Russian military establishment?
Well, it's a difficult question. Obviously, they're a much smaller force, but they have one core advantage. They're a battle-hardened force. And obviously, many units that the Russians have stationed in the vicinity of Moscow and in central parts of Moscow, they largely comprise conscripts, because all combat-ready units are being assigned to the front line. So the Wagners, in this sense, have the advantage of actually being the perfect stormtroopers. And also, the bigger question is the loyalty of Russia's security services and the military. So far, there hasn't been any skirmishes or any reported front confrontations between opposing sides. The Wagners took control over Rostov-on-Don without being challenged in any way. So while the Russian regulars would have superior firepower and more people under arms, it's a question of which side those military units, those military commanders, conscripts, police personnel, security service personnel will take, and that would actually show the extent of potential problem that Vladimir Putin may be facing or lack of it. So I think the next 24 hours will be the key to determine how successful or unsuccessful this dramatic development will be for the Russians, the Russian state, and its president.